Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Ruvain speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 23rd day of the month of Marcheshvan, 5781. It's the 10th of November, 2020. This coming Shabbat, we will be reading a Parshat Sara from the book of Genesis, chapter 23:1, concluding in chapter 25, verse 18. This coming Monday evening, this coming Monday evening, Tuesday, will be Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the first day of the new month of Kislev. Kislev, of course, is the month of Hanukkah, which begins on the 25th day of Kislev. So we will be talking all about Kislev next week, because actually our next week's broadcast will be on Rosh Chodesh. The day before Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the 29th of Marcheshvan, is the Holiday of Sigd, a holiday, an Ethiopian Jewry holiday that existed in Ethiopia, was celebrated by the Ethiopian Jewish community in Ethiopia for many hundreds of years, and has more recently been imported, shall we say, to Israel, as most of the Ethiopian Jews have made Aliyah, have all returned to Israel over the past few decades. There are still a few thousand Ethiopian Jews in Ethiopia. The government has promised to bring them back, and before the end of 2020, I think a large number of Ethiopian Jews are supposed to be making Aliyah. Let's hope so. I'm going to be talking about the Holiday of Sigd soon. First, let's talk about U.S. elections. I don't really have much to add, except that, as everybody knows, they took place last Tuesday, so this week is really our first broadcast since the elections. All we know is that they're not really conclusive as of this point. The Democrats have declared that Biden is the winner, and many Republicans have declared that there were miscounts, and fraudulent activity, and demanding recounts in certain states. So it's still up in the air. We'll just wait and see. I will say this, however, that President Trump was very widely supported here in Israel. I think the reasons are clear. President Trump's policies toward Israel were to say friendly is to really, it's an understatement. They helped to strengthen Israel politically and diplomatically and militarily, and they certainly have put the Trump policies have put Iran on the defensive and on the verge of collapse. The regime of the Islamic regime of Iran is on the verge of collapse because of the sanctions, and also because of so many of their own missteps. Of course, the assassination of Soleimani, who was the general who was leading the Iranian attempt to take over the Middle East, from Iraq to Syria to the Gulf states to Israel to into North Africa. So regarding President Trump, he dramatically changed American policy in the Middle East in general and toward Israel in particular. You know all the details: the embassy, the Golan Heights, the declaring that the settlements over the Green Line are legal, Jewish communities over the Green Line are legal by international law, and many, many, many other steps that the Trump administration took, including most recently, of course, the treaties with the Arab Emirates and with Bahrain, with Sudan, and quite possibly with other Arab states in the region. A Joe Biden presidency, if it happens, is not particularly sunny for Israel, it would seem. He will most likely, he's declared as much, revert to the tried and failed policies of past administrations, most specifically, of course, the Obama administration, of which he was vice president, reaching out again toward Iran and giving that purveyor of terror and declare of its intention to destroy the state of Israel, and of course its intentions to gain nuclear weapons, giving them a helping hand and letting them get off the ropes and back on their feet and back on their plan toward the takeover of the Middle East and, of course, the destruction of the state of Israel, God forbid. So that's definitely not a good sign. Certainly the Biden administration will try to repair its relations with the Palestinians by injecting a lot of money into the Palestinian Authority, which I can tell you right now is going to go to a lot of Swiss bank accounts. It's not going to do anything for the Palestinians on the ground, in the streets. It's not going to do anything toward moving the Palestinians toward the Palestinian Authority toward any type of reality check, because it'll just give them what they want to dig in and stick their heads in the sand for another 4 years, should it come to that. So that's a plan to throw U.S. taxpayer money away, literally to help the terrorist leaders who lead the PA, and of course that money will also go to lifelong stipends for perpetrators of terror, of murder of Israelis here in Israel. So those are just some of the things we can look forward to should there be a Biden administration. But for the next 2 months, President Trump will still be in the White House, and he still will be able to conduct his foreign policy here in the region, and we'll see what happens. There may be another round of treaties being signed between Israel and some of the other Sunni Arab states in the region. We'll have to wait and see. As I mentioned earlier, the holiday Sigd, which is an Ethiopian Jewish holiday, will be celebrated this coming Sunday in Israel, the 29th of Marcheshvan, the final day of the month of Marcheshvan. And the Sigd is a holiday that it's not certain when it began. It was either some 400 years ago or even earlier than that, maybe over 1,000 years old. And it takes place 50 days following Yom Kippur, which happens to fall on the 29th of Marcheshvan. And it is sort of a three-pronged holiday. It is to embrace the Torah tradition, and also to express their yearning to return to Jerusalem and the Holy Temple. And what would take place, first of all, the word Sigd is an ancient Gez word, and Gez is an ancient Semitic language related to Hebrew. And the word Sigd means to prostrate oneself, to worship. It's related to an Aramaic word, also of the Semitic languages, which appears in Jewish liturgy in our prayer book. And it's also related to the Arabic word from which the word Mizgad, which is translated into mosque, a place of worship. And in fact, in Ethiopia, the synagogue was known as the Masjid, which also a synagogue, a place of worship. So Sigd is a day of worship, obviously. And the tradition was that the communities would pack up their supplies, including animals to be slaughtered, and march en masse to a nearby mountaintop. The Jews of Ethiopia lived in northern Ethiopia in a very mountainous region, and they would march up to the top of a mountain, face toward Jerusalem, read the Kesim, or the spiritual leaders, the rabbis of the communities. The Kesim would read to the people from the Torah, from the which was written in Gez as well, the Torah of the Ethiopian Jews. Some of the sections they would read were from Ezra and Nehemiah because they saw that as inspiration. Ezra and Nehemiah, as we know, when the Jews returned from Babylon to Israel, they recommitted themselves to the Torah because they had, many of these people had strayed and married foreign women, and they weren't performing the commandments, observing Shabbat, etc. Why was this part of this particular celebration? One understanding, one tradition is that following tremendous persecution from Christians, which the Jews were able to rebuff, they celebrated or commemorated the fact that they stood by the Torah and kept the faith. Now, the Ethiopian Jews, traditionally it's understood that they made their way into Ethiopia during the First Temple period. That they actually, even before the temple was destroyed, they made sort of a voluntary exodus out of Israel, and by way of Egypt entered into Ethiopia. There's references to by the prophet Isaiah to Jews in Ethiopia. It's a fascinating history. There's also the 9th century account of Eldad Hadani, who reported to a community in North Africa that he had been in Cush, which is a traditional name for the Ethiopian region, traditional Hebrew name. He had been there, and some of the lost tribes were there, including the tribe of Dan. And so the tradition was that the Ethiopian Jews originated from the tribe of Dan. According to this account by Eldad Hadani, they left northern Israel, where their inheritance was, when the kingdom of northern Israel, that would split away from the kingdom of Judea, wanted to go to war against the Judeans, and they refused to participate in the war against their brethren. So they left rather than go to war against their fellow Jews. And I can go on and on. It's fascinating history. The 15th century rabbi David ben Zimra, who was a rabbi of Cairo, and eventually moved to Israel, where he spent his final years in the city of Tzfat. He also had contact with the Jews of Ethiopia and recognized the Jews of Ethiopia. Other famous names in Jewish Torah scholarship and history, like the Bartanora, also talks about the Ethiopian Jews. There was a time during Ethiopian Jewish history where they had managed to, they basically had their own kingdom, they had their own state, and had independence. And this was during the 16th century, after Jews had been expelled from Spain. The rumor that Jews in Ethiopia had an independent state with an army was a tremendous source of inspiration for Jews around the world who were facing a horrible persecution. So despite the fact that they were disconnected from world Jewry, and for that reason disconnected from so long an antiquity that they didn't have the rabbinic tradition that other Jews have to this day, but held on to older traditions, some of which even going back to the First Temple period, which is a very fascinating way for us to learn about First Temple period traditions through the culture of the Ethiopian Jews. Anyway, they fascinating community, fascinating history. I encourage you to check into it. And they fell upon hard times, very hard times. In the 19th century, famine and serious persecution and missionizing. And they were during the 1980s, I guess, there was a horrible famine in Ethiopia, and then there was a civil war in Ethiopia, and that's when Israel began to rescue, help the Ethiopians who were already on their way to Israel, help them to get to Israel. Again, another fascinating episode in our history, and an amazing aliyah, an amazing community that moved to Israel. And now they have the Sigd here in Israel. It's celebrated all over Israel. The central focus of the celebration takes place in Jerusalem and Armon HaNatziv on a promenade which overlooks the Temple Mount. So it's a very appropriate place to celebrate. And the Kesim, again, there read from the Torah, from the to everybody gathered. And then, so traditionally it was a fast day in Ethiopia. When they would go up to these mountains, they would fast most of the day. But before the end of the day, they would slaughter animals and have a feast. That's how the day was concluded. So today it's celebrated here in Israel. It was made an officially recognized holiday, I think in 2008, and I plan to be there. Hopefully it will be taking place. I'm sure there'll be some restrictions because of the corona, but I plan to be there on Sunday. I will certainly take pictures and some video footage and report to you from what's happening. Sigd. That is the holiday of Sigd. One thing which I find very inspiring about Sigd is that it's a holiday that takes place in the month of Marcheshvan. Now, we always say Marcheshvan doesn't have any holidays. You know, it's a month it's a mar, it's bitter because there's no holidays. And we've talked about earlier in the month that tradition has it that the first temple was completed in Cheshvan, but it was only dedicated the following Tishrei, almost a year later. And so the month of Cheshvan was very hurt. And so God said, in the future, the third temple will be dedicated in the month of Marcheshvan. So I see the Sigd as a sign that that's coming very close, because it's a holiday that takes place in Marcheshvan. And so Marcheshvan might not be so mar anymore. And I think it's a sign that the temple will be built soon. And things are going in the right direction. No matter who won that election in the United States, things are going in the right direction, and we have to always remember that. This week, Parshat Chaye Sara, this coming Shabbat, Chaye Sara, which literally means the life of Sara, Sara Imenu. Sara, of course, the wife of Avraham, the mother of Yitzchak. And this Parsha, which begins with Chaye Sara, actually announces the death of Sarah. It's a very beautiful opening verse in this week's parsha, which goes like this. And the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And so the question is asked, why doesn't it say she lived 127 years? Why did it say 100 years and 20 years and 7 years? And Rashi, the great commentator, the great 12th century commentator, he said the reason the word years was written after every number is to tell you that every number is to be expounded upon individually. When she was 100 years old, she was like a 20-year-old regarding sin, because she was pure as a 20-year-old. And when she was 20 years old, she was as beautiful as when she was a 7-year-old. And finally, it says the years of the life of Sarah, and Rashi says, because all of them were equally good. So this is the Torah's own little eulogy to Sarah. And what's very fascinating is that Sarah's death is the first death that is recorded in Torah that includes a eulogy, because it says in the following verses that Avraham eulogized her, and involves a burial. I mean, this is the 20th generation of mankind recorded in the Torah, and it's recorded that every generation, this one was born, this one lived so many years, this one had so many children, and this one died. But this is the first time that a burial is being recorded. And of course, this is the dramatic episode in which Avraham purchases the Machpelah cave, the double-chambered cave from Ephron, the Hittite, in Kiryat Arba in Hebron. And of course, the Machpelah cave is a place visited by Jews every day of every year in Hebron. And in that cave today are buried the the patriarchs and the matriarchs, excluding Rachel. And it's the first piece of land purchased by Avraham in the land of Canaan, Israel, the land that was promised to him and his offspring. And he made certain, as you're all familiar with, from the opening verses of Holiday of Sigd, he was insisted that he pay for this land. Ephron said, "Oh, you don't need to pay. We honor you. You're a holy man. You can take my cave and the field around it and bury your dead there. No one's going to have a problem with that." And Avraham said, "No, I have to pay you." Because Avraham wanted to be recorded, and it's recorded very carefully in Torah that Avraham made the purchase, so that nobody could ever deny that he purchases this piece of land and that it belongs to his children, the children of Israel. After Sara is buried, the Torah goes on to describe the final act, really, of Avraham's life, and that was to secure a bride for his son Yitzhak. Avraham was old, and he was concerned that his son should have a wife, so that he would be comforted after the loss of his mother, and so that they would have children, because of course that was God's promise. So he sent his trusted servant. Now, his trusted servant is not given a name anywhere here in Parshat Sara, but we understand his trusted servant to be none other than Eliezer, who was mentioned much earlier in Avraham's saga. He's mentioned twice. Once when Avraham needs to go to battle in order to rescue his nephew Lot, who was captured in war, and so he organizes his men, the men of his household, as a commando unit to go rescue him in Damascus, from Damascus, and Eliezer is mentioned there. And he's also mentioned when Avraham was not having children, when Sarah was not having children, and Avraham was wondering how God's going to fulfill his promise when he can't even have children. And he said to God, take Eliezer, he's my trusted servant, so he'll be my inheritance. And God said, no, not Eliezer, you're going to have a child. But we make the connection. It seems clear that this is Eliezer who Avraham entrusted to find a bride for Yitzhak. He sent him back to Haran, where Avraham came from, in order to find a bride among his people for Yitzhak, with the caveat that she had to come back to the land of Israel, because his servant said, what if she doesn't want to come back? Should I have Yitzhak go to her? And he said, nope, they have to be here. So the servant sets out in his way, and of course he himself determines the criteria, again I'm using that word, the criteria for how he will locate this woman. He makes his way to Haran, and then he has to find out the right woman. And, he says, God, this woman, I'm by the well, and I have my camels here, and if a maiden comes and I ask for water, and she says, here's water for you, and let me water your camels as well, that's the one, because that's a sign that this is a righteous woman. So what I find so beautiful about this story, the tale of Eliezer and how he finds Rivka, giveaway there, he finds Rivka to be the bride for Yitzhak, is two things. One is that Avraham completely trusted this man. He wasn't Avraham's son. He was a servant of Avraham. He worked for Avraham. He was part of Avraham's household. He was part of this community that Avraham created around himself, a community of God, a community of Hashem. And we learn from the actions of this righteous servant how he addresses God, how he blesses God, how he thanks God, how he asks God to do the right thing for his superior Avraham. from his behavior, we learn about this amazing community that Avraham created around himself, Avraham and Sara. That it wasn't just Yitzchak, who was, his flesh and blood, but there was a community as well that understood that there was one God, understood that God blessed Avraham, understood that God loves his creation, loves mankind, understood that there's a purpose in the world, that God's will is expressed in the world. And his behavior is so incredible. It's without blemish. He performs this mission, and even when the people in Haran, the family of Rivka, say, "Oh, stay for a while, stay for a few weeks, stay for a few months before you go back," and he's, "I can't stay. I have to go back right away." And then they ask Rivka if she's willing to return with him immediately, and she says yes. His behavior is exemplary. He is a perfect, not merely the perfect servant of Avraham, he's the perfect servant of Hashem, servant of God. And I just think that if you read this parsha carefully, you'll learn what was going on. Avraham, when we read about Avraham, he's got, this test and that challenge and this one he meets with and that one he meets with, and these are all very dramatic incidents, but it's not the day-to-day. And we get a different glimpse, I think, through the mission of Eliezer, the servant of Avraham. We get a different glimpse of, again, that how people in Avraham's community that he created, how they conducted themselves, how they saw the world, how they saw Hashem, how they saw themselves. And it's fascinating and it's beautiful. Another beautiful aspect of this whole account of Eliezer's journey to find Rivka and to bring her back is the details about life in those times. The well, the jewelry that he brought, with him, and that he gave to Rivka as obviously as a sign of commitment. And how she went back and told her family, how the family brought him the amazing hachnasat orchim, the amazing way they treated this guest from afar, and how he talks about Avraham and how he has succeeded in life and all the good things that have happened. You get a real, glimpse of the how it was, how life was conducted in those days, how people lived, how people acted toward one another. And it's very, very beautiful. It's very inspiring. I just love this parsha, and of course the conclusion of the journey to find the bride when Rivka returns, and just gonna go to the verses right now. I'm in chapter 24, let's say verse 58, and they summoned Rivka, the family. This is after Eliezer said, "I have to return right away." And they said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." Also, it's very fascinating that ultimately she had to consent to going back with him, even though, everything was arranged through her parents, etc., etc. She had a word in it. She could have said, "I'm not going back with this guy." She said, "I'll go." So they went away. So they sent away Rivka, their sister, and her nursemaid, and Avraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rivka and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands of myriads, and may your seed inherit the cities of their enemies. Again, a fascinating glimpse into a blessing that these people of Haran gave to their daughter. And it's recorded in the Torah. It's a very beautiful blessing, and it's become part of our heritage, of course. But this is something that happened then, words that were said then, something that was a blessing that was given. And Rivka and her maidens arose and rode in the camels, and they followed the man, and the servant took Rivka and left. Now Yitzchak was on his way coming from Be'er Lachai Roi, and he dwelt in the land of the south. And Yitzhak went forth to pray in the field towards evening. And he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were approaching. And Rivka lifted her eyes, and she saw Yitzhak. And she let herself down from the camel. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field towards us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." And she took the veil and covered herself. And the servant told Yitzhak all the things that he had done. And Yitzhak brought her to the tent of Sara, his mother, and he took Rivka, and she became his wife, and he loved her, and Yitzhak was comforted for the loss of his mother. This is, Hollywood doesn't come close to this. This is beautiful. This is just beautiful. I could go on and on. I don't have time to do that now, but take the time and read this week's parsha and just let it sink in. There's so much beauty in it, and so much goodness, and so much love, and so much to reveal how life was in those days. And again, the fact that Avraham trusted the fate of his people with a servant who was not his seed. It wasn't Abraham's son, but he trusted the fate to this, as far as this account is concerned, unidentified servant. I mean, we put it together and figure out it's Eliezer, but for this purposes, he's not even identified. Avraham had such trust in this man who he basically spiritually raised in his household and taught him everything, that he sent him on a mission. You would think Avraham would say, take me there, I'll go, I'll work it out. Avraham had total trust in this person, and this person came through. So the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, the world, owes everything, literally everything, to this servant who served his master Avraham and served Hashem perfectly. Amazing. Just amazing. And that is the story of Rivka and Yitzhak to this point. And Yitzhak, of course, was meditating in the field. It says, the translation I read said, went forth to pray. The word in Hebrew is lasuach, which is not exactly the word usually used to pray, but to, sometimes it's translated as meditated. That he was walking in a field talking to God. And it was toward evening, meaning it was the afternoon. And so our tradition assigns this as being the source of the daily afternoon prayer of Mincha that Jews around the world pray each day before sunset. Mincha. Avraham, who rose early in the morning to do the Akedah, to do the binding of Yitzhak. He's not the first time it was mentioned. He rose early in the morning to do God's word. He is understood to be the initiator, the source of our morning prayer service. And of course, Yaakov, who went to sleep and at night had the dream and the vision of the Holy Temple, he is the initiator of the evening prayer. But right here, we have Yitzhak, who is praying in the field when he first sets eyes on his new bride, Rivka. And Rivka, of course, as soon as she sees him and is told who he is, covers herself up out of modesty. And they meet, and he's comforted. It says he brought her to his mother's tent. And again, Rashi tells us that when they brought her to her mother's tent, the Shekhinah, the presence of God, returned to the tent, showing him that that's what comforted Yitzhak, that it was a sign that this was absolutely meant to be. She was the woman for him, and of course, we're still at the beginning of the saga of the children of Avraham, the children of Yitzhak, the children of Israel. We'll be talking about in the upcoming weeks, of course. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.